Tech Addicts Episode 5, Seb's Place. This week we're talking to British retro tech enthusiast Seb from the YouTube channel Seb's Place. We discuss his love for classic 8-bit and 16-bit systems alongside more modern retro avenues in this retro special. Hello and welcome to the Tech Addicts podcast. I be your host, Gareth, and as ever, I'm joined by Ted. How are you doing, Ted?
Hello, I'm all right, thank you. No complaints that I can think of. So let's get to it.
Okay, well, first of all, weather report. It's wet and a bit windy.
Oh yeah, I forgot about weather.
I knew a girl who was like that. Sorry.
It's about the same here, actually. Yes, sorry.
Sharing a weather front, are we? Well, actually, we also have an extra special guest with us as well this week. We're doing a bit of a retro special, and we've invited over Seb from Seb's Place on YouTube. Seb, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Well, howdy. How's weather in your parts?
It's very bright and sunny, actually, but freezing cold. And I'm sitting my my sort of man cave, I suppose you could call it, is a converted garage, and it's single skin brick and very cold, so I've got two heaters at the moment keeping me warm.
Nasty.
Whereabouts are you roughly?
In North Herts.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, about as north of Hertfordshire as you can get, so about 30 minutes away from Cambridge.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of Cambridge. I haven't heard of
yeah.
Herts is Hertfordshire.
Yeah? That's it. Yeah.
Grand.
Yeah.
Grand. Well, Ted's from Chichester but living in Wales, and I'm in Northern.
Nice.
Cool. Or the province, as you guys like to call it. So obviously our listeners may not be entirely familiar with exactly who you are, but you're a YouTuber of note who investigates 8-bit systems and retro systems on your channel. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm very much an 8-bit guy. That's kind of my big gaming. I suppose gaming passion is really on the 8-bits, and then I do a little bit of 16 bits as well, maybe SNES stuff a little bit, but mainly.
Hey.
I'm trying to currently play every single SNES game that was released in the PAL region, and I'm up to the M's, I think.
Right.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to the S's where everything was super. So that's going to be fun. But mainly the 8-bit stuff is where my interest is.
See, that's quite unique, really. If you go to YouTube and type in retro gaming, you get all the people who are just doing Nintendo and angry video game nerds wannabes.
Yeah.
Whereas you actually look at the good old-fashioned British microcomputers more so, and I think that's really what's endeared me to your channel.
Yeah, I think that's where the passion lies. And the SNES stuff's quite funny because it does quite badly on my channel. And I kind of learned early on you kind of have to try and stick to one particular thing so that people sort of know what your channel's about. And if you then suddenly go, well, I'm 8-bit, and then throw in a bit of 16-bit, people are like, oh, what's this? And don't generally watch that. And then you're kind of relying on your videos being found by another audience. So I have kind of two separate communities almost. I have the guys who just watch the SNES stuff and wait for that stuff on my channel. And then I've got all the other guys that watch the 8-bit stuff. So yeah, right. It's a bit of a mix.
Ted, you know what an 8-bit computer is, don't you? Just checking.
I do, and there's from what my observation as the uninitiated person here is that the 16-bit, there was a huge leap from what I can see between the two. The 8-bit was really blocky and feeling very retro, whereas when it went to 16, it seems to have taken a large leap.
Yeah, it was a massive leap, particularly at the time. It was was mind blowing how big that leap was. Which is why, I very much quickly at the time, ditched everything. 8-bit, my beloved ZX Spectrum went straight up in the loft, and my dad was a typewriter engineer, and typewriters were obviously dying a very slow, painful death. So he had to change jobs and got into computers, and had to bring a computer home to sort of work and play around on. And the only place for that to live was in my bedroom. So I was quite fortunate to have a 286 and then a 386 and a 486 PC as well. And that was just, next level compared to the ZX Spectrum. But
that's where I came in really. In 1985, I had my first. I think it was a 28. No, I think it was an 086. No, I think it was a 286.
Yeah.
And that was the first real computer I had after word processors, and it went from there. I then got into BBC, Acorn, but DOS gaming right at that back then. That's where I was more, doing gaming on a PC, where you had things like Reptor, Repton, really, really basic blocky games on a PC. And then 3 or 4 years later, I found the Game Boy. That was me away then. And then I went to the SNES or the SNES or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
But all of that stuff, Gareth has got me to buy an Evercade.
Okay, yeah, I've got one of those.
And a bunch of games, and all of that I'm just not interested in because I don't know the games. Anyway, I don't mean to hijack your show, so let's hear from you.
So it sounds like you started out with the ZX Spectrum. Was that a 48K? Yeah.
Yeah. So again, my dad managed to borrow a ZX81 from somebody. I remember a box one appearing and then sort of disappearing, and we spent ages, me and my dad, coding from a magazine, typing in a game, a Hangman game, and it just the whole thing just blew my mind that you could control these things on your TV. And so that was where the real interest came from. And then I would say probably 1980, I think it was Christmas 1983. My parents bought me the 48K, the rubber keyed Spectrum, and a Frogger clone game. And it came with the Horizons tape as well, which had a load of different sort of demo things on it, and a sort of Arkanoid game, and that was it really. From then, I was hooked, and a lot of my friends at the same time, at a similar time, got ZX Spectrums as well. So it was very useful for sharing games, shall we say, with all my friends. So yeah, it was a huge influence on my sort of gaming journey in the sort of early 80s, right up to sort of probably 89, 1990 when I started getting into PC gaming, and then onto the 16-bit consoles.
Well, yeah, you've obviously expanded your collection and bits of hardware now, and I've noticed you got a BBC recently, and you bought yourself an Amstrad and a Commodore. What is your loadout when it comes to hardware? What have you got?
Yeah, as part of the channel, really, I was always interested. I had a couple of mates that had Commodore 64s. I had one mate who had an Amstrad CPC, and I just thought it was like the Amstrad came with its own monitor. You had to buy a monitor with it, whether it would be a green screen one or a color one, and they just looked fantastic. And I was always kind of mesmerized by it. And the BBC micro I had at school, so that was always something that, if you were lucky enough to be in a pair that day at school where you went and played on the BBC, that was always quite special, playing those educational titles. So as I've got into YouTube and I've started to look at other games and how they compared to the Spectrum ones, to the Amstrad CPC and the Commodore 64, I really thought to myself, I really need to own these. I need to be able to play these games physically on those machines. So it was just a case of, going on eBay and trying to find something for the right price and picking things up. So yeah, I've got a Commodore 64, a Commodore 64C, an Amstrad CPC 464. I've got my original Spectrum's still my 48K plus, but I bought a 128K plus 2. I got a BBC Micro Model B, and then a few other consoles that I bought along the way as well that I had, and they either died, like my PlayStation 2 didn't survive. I bought a Dreamcast as well because I always wanted one of those. So it was a case of sort of a mix between needing some things for my channel, so that I can say I played these games on the actual hardware and getting that angle, but also just really wanting to physically own some of these things because they're just fantastic machines. So it was a bit of a mix between the two, really.
Yeah, you do get some YouTubers who get quite a bit of backlash whenever they do like the comparison games.
Yeah,
they look across, say, something like Afterburner and look at every platform that was released on, and it's all emulation for particular systems, and it just doesn't run the right way.
I think to get a real feel for a game, I mean, a great example is a game called Whizball that I did a comparison video for, and I played it in emulation first with a SNES controller, funnily enough, because I've got a SNES controller to USB adapter, so I play a lot of games still on the SNES controller because it's one of my favorite controllers. But that game is quite hard to control. The Whizball character bounces around quite a lot, and I had people shouting at me in the comments, "You're not playing the game right. It's not. You're an actual disaster watching. You're playing this game." So I thought, okay. And that prompted me to really go out and buy a Commodore 64, get the right joystick, which was a Kempston joystick in my case, plug it all in, get the Whizball game, and play it actually on the Commodore, and then get a capture card and capture what I was playing. And that made a big difference because it was so much easier to play, but it also proved, that okay, this is what I should be doing. If I'm really sort of investing time in a particular game, let's load it up on the actual hardware and see how it runs and what it's like. So I don't do it all the time. I still do quite a bit on emulation just because it's just a lot easier, especially with the limited space I have here, because I can't have everything set. It'd be lovely to have a space where I had everything set up ready to go. Yeah. And it's like finding the cables and plugging them in, and it can be a bit tiresome, but I still think it's important to play games on the original hardware, which is why I bought the BBC Micro, because I wanted to always play Elite on the BBC Micro, and I never had, and so I wanted not to experience that in emulation, but experience that actually playing it on a BBC Micro, which is great.
Well, but that's the part. It gets expensive then as well, especially now. I went out and I collected a whole bunch of retro hardware about 10 years ago, and I bought a Jaguar plus the Jaguar CD and a Turbo Graphics, and I completed Amstrad. I've got them all.
Nice.
Including a 664 and a working GX 4000. So I had all of those, but I'm scared to touch them. I did have what was it, the Sega Dreamcast? It was one day I was using it and it just popped right in front of me. And I just bought it for, I can't remember how much it was, but it was just like, well, that was a waste of money. And I started looking around, and my Game Boy, the screen fell out of it as well, because is it the glue or something that holds the actual plastic screen in? It's all started to go, and the LCDs gradually degrading on all Game Boys, and they're all going to die soon. I just thought, wow, it's money for old rope, isn't it? You got to be careful. You got to take them, preserve them, put them in airtight cases, and God forbid you actually play them.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that. I do worry every time I load one up that it's gonna work. I had the same problem with my Game Boy. I've still got my original Game Boy, but the plastic that protects the screen's fallen off mine as well. But yeah, unfortunately they're all, some of this stuff is my 48K plus Spectrum is pretty much 40 years old, and it's still going. I haven't recapped it or anything. It's still going. I use a different power supply, and that tends to be the thing that you mainly do, is make sure that you're using a more recent power supply, because a lot of the power supplies are for the older kit are quite dangerous to use now and will often pop things. So
yeah, I think the GX 4000 is quite notorious for that, and I think most of them have died because of the wrong power supply.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, so do you play modern games at all? Are you into that, or is it mostly retro?
Yeah, I mean, I've had every incarnation of the PlayStation. So I have a PlayStation 5, but I don't play many modern games on that. I think I bought the RoboCop game. Was the last game that I bought, the modern RoboCop game. I've got two teenage daughters and another daughter who's 5, and she sort of likes to play some games on her iPad. But the older two were good friends with my neighbours' boys, and they were really into Fortnite around about 2018, 2019. And they were like, "Dad, you need to help us play." And I got involved in it, and then I was just had such a fantastic time. And this sort of carried over through COVID, playing Fortnite with them, and it was a real great sort of bonding experience over gaming. And Fortnite is one of those games that it's forever changing, so it's always quite new and interesting. And so I used to play a lot with them, and then other dads as well would start playing. And then one of the dads, who was a really good friend of mine, moved up north. And the only way that we keep in touch, I don't play Fortnite anymore, but the only way we keep in touch is every couple of months we'll have a virtual beer, and we'll load up Fortnite and try and figure out what's going on, because we haven't played it since the last time we spoke to each other, and then just use it as an opportunity to just play games together and just have a chat and beers. So that's kind of my sort of up to date gaming. But that's probably it. Everything else I play is older stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
You mentioned that you had an Evercade as Ted does as well. What do you think of the modern interactions with retro gaming and the attempt to try to recapture that misspent youth on new hardware? Are you enthusiastic about that? Do you think it's well done?
Yeah, I am. I think it's brilliant. I'm still as I went from Spectrum to PC, I missed the whole. I really missed the Amiga and Atari ST part, because I didn't need an Amiga and Atari ST, because I went straight to PC. So I'm still after getting one of the A500 minis, because I just think it's just an easy way to get into Amiga gaming without having to, because Amigas still hold quite a good price now. And I just want to have a little play with it. I don't want to get hugely invested in it. So I think for that sort of thing, and the retro Spectrum thing that's just come out, I think it's brilliant for getting people back into a way of playing those old games easily. And I really enjoy that. The Evercade's great because it gives you physical copies of games to sort of collect and buy again, and I quite like that with it, without everything having to be digital. So I kind of understand the passion for that. I think that's really great. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it. I think it's great. I've actually got for Christmas I got bought a Raspberry Pi 500, which is the more up to that. There was the Pi 400, and now they made the Pi 500, which is essentially the same thing with a few new bells and whistles, but it's effectively a Pi inside a keyboard. And I've made that into an emulated games machine, and I've got all the old systems and everything on there. And because it's got a keyboard built into it, you can just plug a screen into it and away you go. You can play all your Spectrum games, all Commodore games and everything else, because you've got the keyboard straight there. So that's brilliant.
I think we've covered that a few times on the show. Actually, Ted, you were interested in buying one of those, weren't you? A white keyboard. It's got a red back to it.
Yeah, because it's got everything inside it, and you think, yeah, that's job done. It's all it's all kind of set up for you. As soon as you open the box, you can get stuck into it. But I've never done it as yet. Yeah, all those ports around the back. It looks like it's a really nice little package, and not a huge amount of money.
No, it's very reasonable. I think I picked it all up for, I think it was around about 100 quid, I think, all in.
Yeah.
Very, very reasonable, and it plays all those DOS, those DOS games with DOSBox, and it plays all them brilliantly, and with the keyboard, and you plug a mouse in, and and away you go. It's all there in one little complete package.
P400, is it?
Yeah, Pi 500. So that the first one was the 400, and then they recently, I think it was maybe October, November last year, they released the 500, which is, I think it's got the same quad core ARM processor in it, but it's got better cooling, and it's got some other additional enhancements. I'm not sure what they are, but it's a similar thing, but it's just packaged a bit better. So
okay.
And they released the Pi monitor as well at the same time.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, mine plugs straight into my TV, so I didn't bother with that. But that looks quite nice. It fits quite nicely with the whole sort of the white aesthetics. It looks quite nice.
Well, so is any Spectrum enthusiast going to plug it into their TV, isn't
they? Yeah, exactly.
Ted, sorry.
Is the 500 really, really new? Because I'm looking on Amazon and it's all 400. There's not any sign of 500.
Yeah, so they released the first batch to like Pi Hut, and I think that there's another big Pi reseller in the UK, and within the first couple of weeks, they'd completely sold out. And
okay.
I was looking. My wife said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And I said, "I really want one of these." And we looked, and I just put myself on the waiting list, and they did have another batch come out, sort of mid-December. I managed to get one then, and then I think they sold out again. But if you go onto the big sort of Raspberry Pi resellers, you should be able to find one.
However, there's a 400 for 59 quid now.
Yeah, that's cheap. That's good.
Worth a shout, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievably good. Yeah, that will do everything that you want it to do.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you just you've installed a load of emulators. Is there a particular OS you're using on that? Is it back?
Yeah,
like
I had a few issues because there is I use the RetroPie images, which you can download from the RetroPie website, and but it's all built for the Pi 400. They haven't got a Pi 500 image yet, so I had to do a little bit of mucking about and creating my own image to get that working. So I think they're looking at getting that sorted pretty soon and having a proper Pi 500 build. But it's just essentially, it just loads. You just run it. It just installs everything you need. It's all backed by RetroArch, and it has all the cores enabled. And then just away you go. You can just add other cores if you want. But it's so easy, and you just whack your ROMs on there, or your tape images or whatever it is, and away you go. You're playing your games pretty quickly. But the Pi 400, I think it has RetroPie has images already built for that, so you just click and away you go. Whereas the Pi 500 is still quite new, so I think we just have to wait on that. But you can get it going. There are a number of YouTubers that have done videos on it and stuff, so you can find ways around it.
Okay. Top tip. There you go. You're going to do this, Ted? Or are you ordering one now?
I am actually looking on Amazon and thinking to myself, there's a lot to learn here. There's all sorts of kits, and it's not just as simple as, like I said before, buying it and you're ready to go. There's tons of other stuff that are bolt-ons and add-ons that you can get. So yeah, now that we've spoken about it again, I'm re-enthused, so I should look into it.
I guarantee you no update next week, as Ted will do nothing. Whenever it comes to retro systems, do you have a most disappointing system? Is there one system that you're like, no, like the Dragon 32 or I'm not going to bother with that. I don't like the C16.
I think, I bought years and years ago. I was walking past a charity shop window, and there was an Atari 2600 fully boxed with a load of games, both joysticks and the paddles and everything, for about a tenner. Because it was just way before these things really started kicking in on prices. And I bought it, and I set it all up and got it home. And I think because I didn't have any nostalgia for the Atari 2600, it was just before my sort of gaming journey. I just thought the games were terrible. The joysticks, that sort of iconic Atari joystick, I didn't like. Very, very stiff, very awkward to use. And I think I spent sort of half an hour trying all the different games. It came with Adventure and Circus, so some of the real classic games. But I must have spent probably about an hour tops, and then it all went back in the box. And then recently I got, for the PlayStation 5, my kids one Christmas bought me the Atari Anniversary Edition game that's got all the games from all the different Atari systems on it. And I thought I'll try some of the 2600 games again. I'm going to have to try them. I've got to try and like this stuff. And it was a slightly better experience because, I kind of try and experience them as I would have experienced them back in the day, and not just, they are quite blocky and they are quite terrible. And you could say that for a lot of 8-bit games, but I think nostalgia helps a little bit there. But yeah, I still struggled to find much enjoyment out of them. So I'm sure back in the day, back at the time, the 2600 was obviously the big system back then, when it first came out. So I imagine it was, if you played it then and you've still got that nostalgia for it, you'd argue that those games are still incredible. But yeah, I did struggle a little bit.
I've done the same thing. I remember getting Raiders of the Lost Ark. I went out and got a 2600, a copy of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and even E.T. And plugging them in and going, what is this? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And it's not like it came with an instruction manual so that you can understand what the emblems on the screen are actually for. And you have to go to YouTube and watch someone else play it and tell you what they think they're doing.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, a lot of the adverts for the Atari back then were, this game's got, 300 different unique ways you can play the game, which is just the different difficulty settings that you can set by setting the switches on the Atari 600 in certain ways. But yeah, I mean, ET is a great example because that was obviously the one that was rushed out very, very quickly before that Christmas, wasn't it? To get in with the tie-in of the game, with the movie, and it was considered one of the worst games in history. So yeah.
It is phenomenal looking at the difference between something like that. And I recently bought Sniper Elite Resistance, and I have to say I'm getting a wee bit hacked off with the. It's a brand new game that's arrived on Steam and PlayStation and Xbox and all that. It's got a lot of hand holding, at places where you can climb up a wall are highlighted because they've got white paint on them, and it makes you think. There's no experimentation here. There's no sort of being able to find something out. And it makes me think back to the old games, like whenever I sat down and tried to play Hunter Killer on the Amstrad CPC, I actually started working that out. Or something like Elite, how to play Elite. You're a genius compared to what is happening now. It's hand holding central.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's down to kind of that instant sort of gratification that you get. You can just load a game in now. You instantly, you're sitting down, you're playing it. Whereas certainly back when I was playing games on my ZX Spectrum, you're loading things from a cassette. You're probably quite limited to what you've got available to you. So you're really having to be invested in the game whether you liked it or not, because it took you 5 minutes to load it. Up to 5 to 10 minutes to load it. Sometimes it would crash and you'd have to try and load it again. And so you could be waiting half an hour to play the game. So you're never in a position where you're thinking, okay, this is rubbish, or I don't understand what I'm doing. I'm going to turn it on and play something else, because you've spent all that time trying to get it to work. So even if you didn't have the instructions, you would really try your hardest to try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, the newer stuff, the hand holding thing annoys me a bit, and also those tutorials that you have to do. That I found that with RoboCop, it was like, the first level was kind of a tutorial, but it took so long, so annoying. Just get on with it. I just want to play. So yeah, it's kind of getting
20 minutes to start the game.
Oh, let's just get on with it, So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a balance between the two, I guess.
Mm-hmm. There was nothing better than going out and getting a new game, and you sit and wait for it to load on a cassette player, in an Amstrad or a Spectrum or Commodore, and you sit and read the inlay.
Yes.
You look at the controls, and it's like, oh, blimey, crikey.
Yeah.
So that uses more controls.
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of all part of it. I remember, getting the bus into town, buying the game, and then on the bus journey back home, you're poring over everything, getting all the details and everything you can sort of cram into that bus ride home, and then getting home, loading it up, and then figuring out what you got to do. So the excitement built, and it's not really the same anymore because everything is so immediate. Although saying that, a lot of big games now, if I haven't played a game for ages, I think, I'll quickly go and play that. And then you load it up and it says, you need an update, and then you've got to wait 3 hours for an update. So maybe there is still a bit of that now.
But where we have things like the Steam stores to be able to buy games on the PC, or your PlayStation store, your Xbox store, back in the day, you'd head down to Boots or WH Smith's or something like that and just look at whatever games were available. I have quite a few cassette games in my Amstrad collection where the Amstrad had kind of fallen from grace, and the Amiga and the ST were coming in, and they were all being they were sitting in baskets at the bottom of the shelf for 99p, and you'd go down, you'd be looking through them going, there's nothing really I want here, and you end up just buying something that, just for the sake of buying it, like a Hanna-Barbera games or something like that, something that you'd maybe grown out of a long time ago, but you just thought, it's a game and it looks all right. I'll take it home, and then other kids will take the piss out of you because you bought it Rough and Ready or something like that. Yeah. But I did notice in one of your videos recently where I'm sure it's caused a lot of controversy amongst your fans, is the overinflated games or the overhyped games, or overrated games. And I got my soapbox a wee bit about Dizzy, because I sat there and go, no, I absolutely adore Dizzy. I have played all of them, and I've completed almost 2 of them. But yeah, that was there any feedback from that? Were people raging, or?
I wanted to do a video like that for a long time, but primarily I was always going to do a video about games that I particularly didn't like, that everybody else seemed to like. But then I did think to myself that there might be quite a bit of backlash on that. There's always, you obviously can't please everyone all the time, but I was wondering how I would go about it. And then as part of every year, at the end of the year, I do a video where I sort of sum up how the year's gone, and I do a prize giveaway. And part of that prize giveaway this year is that I asked everybody to give me games that they hated but everybody else loved, and then that gave me a route into that without having any blame on myself. So I was able to say, okay, well, these people said that they hate these games. I'm not saying I hate them. There's Elite is in there, and it's one of my favorite all-time games, but it's all on you. It's none of it's on me. So I'm just gonna try and find what's wrong with these games and try and pick them apart, and then sort of have a top 10 countdown as to which one was your worst, which one got the most votes. So it was kind of a bit of a way out for me, really. But
and there were no pitchforks then.
No, because if anybody moaned and said, how could you say Elite is rubbish? And I'll say, well, I'm not saying Elite's rubbish, and it's not me, it's you guys. So go and moan at other people in the comments, but don't moan at me. So yeah, it was a way out.
What do you think, Ted? Is there any games that you would vote are completely overrated that you've played in your life? Maybe, well, you love Mario, but have you gone, I don't see what people see in this game?
I'm not going to be able
them,
to.
actually.
Well, I'm not going to be able to come up with any specific examples because I haven't been that heavily into gaming. I got lost in Nintendo, I'm afraid, and haven't done the things that you guys have been doing. I did have a spell with the BBC Acorn though, and I can remember going down, reference going down to Smith's, going down and getting the magazine and typing out the code line by line in order to make it do something. This was presumably even before they had cassette tapes with stuff on to kind of, let it load by that route. You just typed it out. And I can remember doing that. But games, I used to look at some of the games that were available for the SNES, and I thought, no, I don't really want to do that. I was so baked into Mario and the really good graphics at the time that was coming out of Japan, and all these other kind of cheaper little games, they just looked rubbish. And when I did try one or two of them out, they frankly were rubbish. But I can't. I'm sorry, I can't quote any titles for you.
Well, okay. It's one of those things, whenever you're put on the spot, you just can't remember. I'm trying to think of a few that I was a bit annoyed, but you have an interesting point there, which is the type-ins. Obviously, Seb, you mentioned that you did some type-ins with your dad earlier in the show. Do you still do type-ins? Have you done many in your life, or is that just a frustration that you did once and went, nope, never doing this again because I can't type?
It was basically just. It was always one of those things we did as kids when we had. There looked like there was something in one of the magazines, whether it be Sinclair User or Crash or whatever. They would sometimes put these listings in with a nice illustration that made you think, wow, this looks like this could be cool. Let's type this in, and then maybe me and a couple of mates would sit down over a Saturday and sort of take turns typing bits in. You try and run it, and then it would say there's some error, and you go through and have to check it all again, and eventually after 6 hours of doing this you'd run this game. Of course, it was never in machine code, it was always basic, so you were never going to get anything fantastic, but it would always be a bit of a disappointment. I don't remember ever sort of typing anything in and then thinking, wow, so glad I did this. There's a channel on YouTube by a chap called Snorkers, What Ho Snorkers, and what he does is he takes these type-ins and then he makes them better, so he improves them, and I quite like that. I quite like the idea of having that expertise to take a game and say, okay, it's a bit rubbish, let's make it better, and that's what he does in his videos, and I quite like that, and that's probably my only sort of foray into typing games now is watching his videos. But other than that, no, I was firmly in the mainly in the play games from cassettes. Let somebody else program it, and I can just load it up from the cassette.
Do you think there's a place for AI kind of writing games for people that you could just tap into? I mean, Gemini, from what my experience so far, is getting more and more clever, and they do talk about coding ability, don't they?
Yeah, I think some people have tried some sort of basic examples, haven't they, of getting AI to write some games, but I don't quite think it's there yet. Right. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see what it can do once it's evolved a little bit more. For definite, yeah, be interesting.
There was a term that I came across quite recently that I'd kind of forgotten about entirely, and it involves type-ins to a certain extent. But back when you had an 8-bit system and you wanted to cheat in said 8-bit system and didn't have like a multi-face or some sort of like a Game Shark, Game Genie type thing that you get for those systems, you would do a poke. Do you poke a lot?
I still, yeah. If I'm running in, if I'm playing a game in an emulator, funnily enough, in the video of the hated games, one of the games was Sabrewulf, which was a very big popular game by Ultimate Play the Game back in the early 80s, and it's a game I don't particularly like. And I tried playing it again. The keys are horrible. The keys are all in one row. So it's Q, W, E, R for left, right, up, down, and then T for your fire, which
Oh.
when you're used to either QAOP or the WASD now, as a lot of games use, it's very, very difficult to get used to having it all on one line. So that was quite hard, and the baddies in that come at you very, very quickly. So I looked through some of the old magazines to look for some pokes, and then I actually thought, as part of the video, I'll go out and buy a physical copy of the game so I can show it. And I managed to get one quite cheap. And inside, when I got the game delivered, inside the box, somebody had written a poke out. And I thought, oh, great. So I'll try it. And it gives you less monsters. So it just gets rid of the monsters enough to make the game playable, but the monsters are still there. And people didn't notice. Somebody in the comments said, well, you should have tried that poke, because I showed the inlay in the video. They said, you should have tried that poke, see what it did. And I replied again, I did. Actually, the gameplay you can see in the video is with the poke. And it was so much easier, because it's most of the time me just trying to work out if I'm going up, down, left or right, because the keys are all on one line. So it was a big advantage.
I actually learned quite a bit about that. I didn't know that Saberwolf was a part of a franchise with Attic Attack and the other games that you went on to mention. I wasn't aware of that. I do have Saberwolf in that nice edition that you showed off somewhere in my collection.
Yeah, they had normal cassette boxes for like Attic Attack and Jetpack and Cookie and those sort of games, and then they went with I think because they realized that Night Law was the game that they kind of finished first, and realized that this game was kind of next level in terms of what it looked like. So they decided to repackage these games in fancier boxes, give them a fancier price sticker. I mean, I think like Attic Attack and games like that were sort of retailing around the £5-6 mark, whereas Saberwolf, Underworld and Night Law, which are the three main Saberman games, they came in at £10, which in 83-84, it's pretty much like 35 quid now. So it's a big expense, but they put them in these fancy boxes to make them look even a bit more polished. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're good games.
No. The boxes were always a bit of a quandary for me. I was always trying to work out, what was good and what was bad whenever you were buying a box, especially after the fact. But I know one of the last games I bought on the Amstrad, I had to order online. I ordered two of them from a listing at the back of, I think it was Amstrad Action, maybe even the last issue of Amstrad Action, was Crystal Kingdom Dizzy. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis action game, and I have them both in the original cardboard boxes, but they were something like 15 quid each.
Yeah,
and whenever you put them in, there was a remarkable amount of effort that went into them, which you wouldn't think that they would have put into it, given that they were pretty much dead systems and they were focusing more on 16-bit, because the 8-bits were quite a bit dead by the time those games came out. But they still honored the fans who loved those games on those machines and went that extra mile for them, which I think is something that doesn't happen now. You talk about backward compatibility and things like that is always a contentious topic with new games consoles, and a money grab, whereas back then it was like, well, you probably still have your Amstrad, so here's your Commodore, your Spectrum. Here's the last Dizzy game that we're going to make.
Yeah.
But you're going to pay through the nose for it.
Yeah, it's going to be expensive.
Do you remember what the last games were that you bought for your Spectrum before you got back into it?
I would say probably the last games I bought were probably very late 80s. Sort of 88, 89. I did a video recently about a game called Target Renegade, which is one of my all-time favorite games on the Spectrum, and how me and a friend, let's just say we altered the price somewhat to our advantage in our local booths, because the older ladies that were doing the counter at the back of the shop for records and cassettes didn't really have an idea of what price was what. So we were able to change the price on that somewhat, and I think that was a full price game, but it was probably the last full price game I bought. There might have been other budget. I was very much heavily buying budget games at that point, because the £2 price point was just perfect for me, with the amount of pocket money I was getting and the extra revenue I was getting from Paper Round, that I could afford a £2 game most weeks, unless I wanted to buy a 7-inch single instead. So it was kind of either music or games was where my money would go, and they were kind of, the price between the two was quite similar. I think a 7-inch single at the time was about £1.50, and I could get a Codemasters game, a Dizzy game, whatever, for £1.99. So, there was always that: do I buy a game? Do I buy some music? So, yeah, I would say budget games were my last ones, but I'm not entirely sure which.
I'd actually say that I think that whenever it came to 16-bit, there was a notable drop off when it came to budget games. They really felt poor. Whereas on the Amstrad or the 8-bits, whenever you bought a budget game, I just think there was a bit more to it, even though there was less to it, obviously. But I think you got your money's worth more so with budget games on 8-bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. And I think as the 8-bits were dying, that was even more so, because when the budget games came in, they were trying to take customers away from the full price games, and they didn't necessarily have to be great games. A lot of the early Mastertronic games, they're quite poor. There was the odd one that was really good, but in generally they were quite bad. But then they were also dealing with magazines at the time that would have cover tapes that they'd give away, and often the cover tapes would have full price games that people like Ocean Software or whoever would say, well, actually we're not making any money from this game anymore. Let's sell it to your Sinclair magazine, and they can go and push out the game for free on the front of their magazine. So budget games, it was either you were buying budget games or you were buying a magazine for a similar price, and on that magazine you'd get a couple of demos, a full price game, and then a few games that readers have sent in. So you were getting quite a lot for your money. So even budget games at that point were sort of competing hard for your business. So they had to be pretty good for you to buy them.
Yeah, I remember on one of the Amstrad cover tapes, I think there was like Route Planner or something. It was like Google Maps, but for the Amstrad. And it took about 20 minutes to load a basic map of, I don't know, Manchester or something like that. And drew them all in vector graphics. It was terrible. But what are your thoughts on more modern homebrew gaming and things like that, where back in the day, the Amstrad was notorious for having lazy ports of Spectrum games just being thrown over, and it wouldn't be optimized and it wouldn't run very well. But now you see people with a labor of love going back and building games from the ground up for the systems and making the most. Like there's a lot of people who are now doing Amstrads can do hardware scrolling. What's it called? Not parallax scrolling. Left right scrolling. Like Grisor doesn't do it on the Amstrad. That's the big problem with it. I can't remember what it's called. Hardware scrolling, something like that.
Yeah.
But they're actually managing to milk the systems for exactly what they can do, and we're seeing these phenomenal games coming out. Even I think the Amstrad's getting a version of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah.
What do you think about the modern homebrew scene?
Yeah, I'm out of touch with it. I don't. It's not something that I cover on my channel so much. It's something that I am sort of thinking about doing a little bit on, just to test the waters, because it does interest me. But because I'm not covering it at the moment, I'm not really looking at those so much. But certainly, what people are able to do and just show what is capable with those machines. I think what we have to remember is back in the 80s, if you worked for somebody like Ocean Software where ultimately Ocean Software would have a programmer and somebody on graphics for each game, so that you'd be paired up for a game. You'd be given a certain amount of time to get that game out. A lot of Ocean games were licenses for movies and so on, so there was very, very tight deadlines to get something out.
And some of these programs were even over 16 years old.
Yeah, exactly. So it was very much you have to get something out quickly, and so the quality wasn't something that was always maybe like bug testing and things like that wasn't really done, or the way that they could have done something could have been done so much better if they had more time to do it. So I think that some people sometimes forget that when playing some of these old games and think, that's a bit rubbish. Surely they could have improved it here or done that. But it was just purely the time constraints that they had meant that they were doing the best that they could with the 6 to 8 weeks or whatever they had just to get that out. So, and I think now with people obviously having that hobby and just being able to spend months getting these games out, they just look phenomenal. It is very, very impressive what they can do with these systems, and it just goes to show. And as you say, with the Amstrad, that was a big problem back in the day, because it was on the same Z80 processor as the Spectrum, so you could just a very similar hardware architecture. So it was just a case of a lot of the core game logic could be just directly translated, and you'd only have to make a small amount of code changes just to get it to work. But you were just left with these games that looked exactly like the Spectrum ones, but because of those small differences would often run slower on the CPC. I'm doing a video at the moment where I'm looking at Durell games, and I was comparing the version of Clive Townsend's Saboteur game on the Spectrum to the CPC. Now they look identical, but the CPC one runs at half the speed. I've been timing it, seeing the guy run from one end of the screen to the other, and it's literally half the speed. It's so sluggish, so framey, and that was one of the limitations sometimes when you're just literally just throwing the same code into the CPC. So it was a problem back then. But yeah, the homebrew stuff is phenomenally impressive, and I do feel it's something I should cover more, for definite.
Yeah, no, it's I remember playing Saboteur on a friend's Spectrum and thinking it was wonderful, and I bought it and the sequel quite recently, in the last 20 years, I suppose. But I've never actually got around to playing it, so it's good to actually hear. But Durell were the ones that made Harrier Attack, which was one of the greatest games on the Amstrad.
Yeah. Again, which was a direct port from the Spectrum one, and was a pack-in title, wasn't it? So Alan Sugar was looking for, it was scouting around for some pack-in titles for the release of the 464, and struck up a deal with Durell. I think I saw somewhere that Durell got something like roughly about 10p per copy for that game. So Mr. Sugar obviously was very shrewd in his business. But
even at that, the amount of Amstrad sold with that bundle. Pooh.
I think they sold. I think it was something over the excess of 100,000 was sold. So they made a bit of money out of it, but yeah, I think it worked out about 10p a copy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you obviously your YouTube channel is doing well. Do you have a favorite type of video to make, or is there a video that you're most proud of?
I would say most proud of it was probably the most recent Mark Jones videos. I did a set of videos about a graphics designer back in the 80s called Mark Jones, or Mark R. Jones, so it doesn't get confused, because there was two Mark Jones at the same time. Both worked for Ocean at the same time as well, to make things more confusing. But he had a PDF that was available free online of his kind of story growing up and getting into gaming. And I got in contact with him, which was the first time I did that. Got in contact with somebody else and said, hey, I'd like to make a video about your experiences. and he was like really heavily involved in the process.
Wow.
You know, I sent him the scripts and everything, and he sort of revised things and helped me make the video. And the first video as it was released was on I think it's my most viewed video. I think it's over 50 or 60,000 views now, so it did really, really well. And then I did a second part to that to sort of finish the story, which also did quite well. So that was good, but that was a much longer form video. Took me about 3 weeks to do, and I quite liked that process, but I couldn't do that for every video. I quite like having the mix, I think, of doing the shorter ones as well. You know, I've started doing a video about Durell, as I said, and that's kind of going to be about sort of a 45 minute video, and that sort of length is quite nice. But if I'm just doing a video just on one particular game, I can get that done in sort of 3 or 4 days, and that's also quite a nice thing to do every now and again. So I kind of quite like the mix. I wouldn't say I could do like documentary videos all the time. I do like having a good mix of how long the video is or how many games you're playing. It's like if you're doing videos with top 10s in, it's great, and sometimes you can get them out sort of half an hour, but there's still a lot of games to play, and playing the games can sometimes take so much time, especially if you have no experience with them. Like the Amstrad CPC, I didn't have much experience with the Amstrad CPC games, and I did a top 10 games from the Amstrad Action magazine. And I hadn't played a lot of the games I had played, but I hadn't played them on a CPC. I played them on the Spectrum, so I had to go away and play them, because you can't talk about a game without knowing how it plays, and that took a long time, because you're not just having 5 minutes with the game. You've got to be invested. So it's kind of getting a mix of all that, I would say, which hopefully I do well enough on my channel. So yeah,
no, that's really cool. And I haven't noticed that one before, but I will go back now, and I know who he is, and I'll have to give that a view. That's 16 years old and working for Ocean Software Part 2.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Part 1 and Part 2 of that I really enjoyed, and it was, for him to, but just leaving school, barely turning 16, and then moving from where he lived in Northampton to live in Manchester, because Ocean at that point were making bad games, and they were basically having freelancers make all their games and just absolutely taking the Michael out of them. So they wanted to get everybody in house. So they offered him a job and said, "Yeah, we like your work, but you've got to come and work here in Manchester." So he upped sticks and moved into a hotel on his own at 16 years old. I mean, can you imagine? In the middle of Manchester city centre, and to work for this huge, like probably the biggest software house at that time, in Ocean Software.
So trying to do that now.
It's just incredible. Yeah, it's just bonkers. It's an incredible story. So yeah, it's fascinating. There's no chance that at 16 I would have done that. So hats off, with big respect to him for giving it a go. And he got some great experiences, and and his name's credited on a lot of games that they put out. So
yeah, it's good to hear something of another story that isn't the Oliver twins. It's all you ever hear in the world is the success story of the Oliver twins.
The Oliver
Which is
right.
interesting.
They are great. I've got the Oliver twins book somewhere here. I have spoken to them before as well on when Roast into Spectrum did a Dizzy marathon where he was playing all the Dizzy games over I don't know, it was a 24-hour time frame, and the Oliver twins got involved and did manage to speak to them, and they're lovely. But I think that story's been done, so it's quite nice to get, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm still looking to get sort of interesting stories that nobody's necessarily told before onto YouTube, and I find that quite interesting. I've always kind of been interested in finding a different angle not just doing the same videos, that everybody's done before. Just trying to find something new and interesting to still talk about for these old systems.
So, do you attend the whole retro scene? There's conventions and things that happen mainly on the mainland. They don't happen in Northern Ireland here, but over in the mainland, do you go to all those big conventions around Birmingham and the likes?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't, and then as the channel's sort of grown, one of the things that happened to me once I did a video about a chap who stole somebody else's game. There was the game back on Mastertronic label called Spellbound, and somebody basically nicked that game and then pushed it out on their own label, or as a different game, and just changed some of the words and text and so on. And that's how my channel kind of blew up, because that video did really well for me. And on the back of that, another YouTuber called Rose Tinted Spectrum got in touch with me and said that there's a group of us that have this sort of community of sort of retro gaming YouTubers, where we kind of help each other, and you give criticism on your videos, or you can do collaborations and so on. Would you like to get involved? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I joined this group. They're called the Big Red Arrow Club, and part of that group are people like Kim Justice, the RMC Museum Place, More Fun Making It. There's all these CRG, who's from Northern Ireland, all these chaps that were and some girls as well, some of the sort of big girl retro YouTubers as well, which is really great. They're all together in this one big sort of Discord community, and we're all sort of helping each other. And as part of that, they go to the different events as the Big Red Arrow Club. And recently, I think back in November, we all went to the Cambridge Centre for Computing. There was a big retro computing event there, and we went as the Big Red Arrow Club, as we had our own sort of setup, name badges and stuff, and went along to that, and I met some other really interesting people, and had a really great day. So there's certainly going to be more of that. I'm hoping to go to, unfortunately, I think the one at Cambridge this year might clash with the Crash Live event, which I'm hoping to go to, because I've not been to that yet, and I want to go to that. But
are you seeing a younger crowd at those conventions, or are they all like us, just getting older and grayer?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely, it's much more of the older percent. I think there are people that I look at the analytics on my YouTube channel, and it's mainly people from 45 to 55. That's kind of my core audience, I would say. And then there's a small percentage either side, either younger or older than that. But anything sort of younger than 30, I would say it's literally like 0.1% or something. It's really, really small. So yeah, there's definitely a target audience that's of a similar age, which I guess makes sense, right? Because a lot of these people have nostalgia for it. It's not, if you don't have nostalgia for it, it can be quite hard. I sometimes try and get my kids involved, and sometimes, you need to play this game. You need to play Bruce Lee on the ZX Spectrum. It's a fantastic game, still fantastic. Come and play it. And they sort of look at me like, and they play it for 5 minutes. And I'm like, what's this, Dad? What am I doing? I go back to my phone. I was like, okay.
Yeah. Frustrating. What's your holy grail of retro? What would you really? Well, if Jesus was to appear in front of you and say you can have one thing, what would it be that you ask for?
It's a great question. For a long while, I really wanted to get hold of a good BBC Micro, and I've managed to do that. So that was kind of ticked off. I again, going back to the sort of Amigas and Atari STs, I would really like to get an Amiga 1200 would be lovely, but they go for astronomical money now. So yeah, if I was ever had the opportunity to get hold of one of those, even if it needed a bit of fixing up, I would probably I would probably be quite excited about that.
Amiga 1200. Well, I got rid of mine actually a couple of years ago.
Did you? Yeah, they go for good money now. But yeah, I think that's probably the one thing that I would kind of. I kind of feel like I've bought everything that I wanted. I wanted pretty much every Nintendo console that was out. I actually don't have the NES. I've still got to get around to getting one. So that is one that I wouldn't mind getting hold of, and they're quite cheap to pick up. So I do need to get hold of one of them. But I do have all the others. I played for the first time last year the Virtua Boy, which obviously I don't have one of those again because they go for silly money, and that was quite interesting. So again, I wouldn't mind one of those to say that I have definitely got all of them outside of the main
Speaking
chunk
of disappointing systems.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's very red. And the 3D effect does work. But yeah, you can see why they didn't do very well. So yeah, I would, if one of them came about, I'd be quite interested to have one of those, because I don't think it's that attainable to get one of them for the price they go for. So yeah, that's probably it, I would say.
All right. Okay. Well, if anyone has an Amiga or Virtual Boy they want to give to Seb,
please do.
Let us know. Yeah. Ted, you ever played with a Virtual Boy? Ever heard of a Virtual Boy?
No, sorry. Moving on. I've heard of a Game Boy.
It's a similar thing.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, if I could get an original Game Boy now, which you can buy for, reasonable money, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I'd want my half dozen games that I had with it. Because that's all I'd be interested in playing: the Mario Golf and the Mario Tennis and the Tetris and the whole little set that I had. I'd want the bundle back, otherwise it wouldn't be worth it.
So you're not interested in trying anything new, just all your old favorites. Fair enough. All right. Well, we'll bring it to a close and let Seb get on with his life and get back to making videos. Where can people find you, Seb?
Yep. So it's Seb's Place YT. I think that's my handle on YouTube. God, rubbish. But yeah, it's Seb's Place on YouTube. And Seb's Place on Facebook as well. I'm in all the ZX Spectrum groups and everything. On those tend to be the sort of better communities. I don't tend to Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I am on there, but don't tend to use that so much now. That's becoming a rather interesting place to visit these days, isn't it? So I don't tend to go on there so much. But yeah, that's probably the two main places to find me.
Sweet. And your video content isn't sort of you don't do one a week. It's kind of when it's done and perfected.
Yeah, I started off trying that one a week process, but having a full-time job and trying to get one video out a week, I always felt like this was a hobby and something that I enjoy firstly, and not something that I do for anybody else. So that was the very first kind of thing that I instilled into myself. I want to keep on enjoying doing it, and if I feel like I'm in time pressures and stuff, I'm just not going to enjoy doing it. So I try and maybe get them out once every 2 weeks, but it's sometimes once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, depending on the length of video I'm doing and how much time I've managed to save to do it. Because having 3 kids and and a dog and a full-time job and everything else, it's quite difficult sometimes to find the time to do your hobbies, right? So,
in Duke Nukem's words, when it's done.
Exactly, when it's done.
All right, Ted, where can they find you?
TedSalmon.com. That's my homepage. That's where I've got all my links out to all our MeWe groups and all of our other audio podcasts. So do pop along there. And if you want to buy me a copy, it's at paypal.me/TedSalmon. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can by emailing us at gareth@techaddicts.uk. We're also on Twitter or X at Tech Addicts UK. I'm on Twitter and X as well, at Gareth Myles. That's GarethMyles. I also have Mastodon and Blue Sky, just for those good reasons. And I've got my .com as well. It's GarethMyles.com. And other than that, I guess we can all love yous and leave yous, and we'll get back to yous next week for another thrilling installment of the Tech Addicts podcast. Take care now.
Bye.